This budget request for the commission is more than $448 million. It's nearly 15% higher than the original fiscal 2024 enacted level.
We need to take insecure equipment from China out of our nation's networks.
Ronald Reagan, who said that there's no better example of eternal life than a government program.
85% of households on ACP today, again, a program that we said at the FCC is designed to get people online that couldn't afford it, would still be connected to the internet without the program.
You know, if you're from Mobile, Alabama, and you move to Los Angeles and you dial 988, you're still going to be connected back to someone in Mobile, Alabama, but maybe you need resources in California. We can fix this with our geolocation proposal. Having the FCC make decisions about what's correct and not correct, what's right, what's fair, what's equal and not, is an ominous role for government in this media environment. Not many people talk about polls, but it's really important.
Where's the first 911 call?
Haleyville, Alabama.
Thank you.
I appreciate both of you participating in today's hearing to give members of the subcommittee the opportunity to discuss the Federal Communication Commission's fiscal year 2025 budget request. This budget request for the commission is more than $448 million. It's nearly 15% higher than the original fiscal 2024 enacted level, and much larger increase than the commission has historically requested. As I mentioned during my opening statement, I was interested, though maybe not surprised, to see that the agency requested no money within its budget proposal for the Secured and Trusted Communications Network Reimbursement Program known as RIP and Replace. Instead, the budget proposal refers back to supplemental appropriation requests in what seems to be an attempt to rely on emergency spending rather than being clear about the overall budget requests for the FCC. Chair Rosenworcel, about how many small providers are you aware of that that have invested dollars to remove Huawei and ZTE equipment but are waiting on funds from Congress to replace it?
Thank you for the question. I want to point out from the start that I agree with you that getting funding for this program is essential. We need to take insecure equipment from China out of our nation's networks. We have roughly 122 providers that have signed up for reimbursement. And at present, based on the appropriation that Congress gave us, we can only offer them 40 cents on the dollar for the replacement of that network equipment. It is not in our budget because it is not a part of our baseline. It is a one-time expenditure. And the previous administration estimated we would only need $1.9 billion to replace this equipment. But when I took over, we found that there was a shortfall of just over $3 billion. In part, that shortfall is because Congress changed the criteria for who would be eligible to participate in this program, substantially expanding it. Right now, we're going to need those monies to make sure that these networks, which generally serve rural communities, can continue to stay up and running and can remain secure.
Mr. Carr indicated he did not support the request for greater FTEs. Would you explain why those are necessary?
Sure. First of all, I want to point out that the Federal Communications Commission is operating during my tenure with the lowest level of employees we've had for 20 years, okay? So we are already cut to the bone. But when I stare at the future of communications, I see tremendous growth. With the help of this subcommittee, we reorganized and created a space bureau. We have a strategic asset in our skies associated with our leadership in the next generation of satellites. We need more engineers, economists, and space policy experts to ensure that continues. As we look to the 6G future, it's going to be harder and harder to identify new ways to get spectrum, and we're going to need more creative engineers who can help us do so. And when I think about the Internet of Things, we're working on a cyber trust mark to make sure everyone trusts the devices they bring into their homes. We're trying to build a standard so that we can get ahead of our counterparts in Europe and elsewhere who are also trying to do one.
One of my favorite historical persons is Ronald Reagan, who said that there's no better example of eternal life than a government program. Was he talking about ACP?
Thank you for the question. It's certainly possible that that idea could apply here. I think the conversation here is one where there actually could be some common ground. But I think for us to talk about this 23 million figure and say that therefore this program is a success doesn't really do justice to our obligations for fiscal responsibility. Again, we have lots of people on this program that are using the ACP benefit for a third internet connection. And again, the data shows that 85% of households on ACP today, again, a program that we said at the FCC is designed to get people online that couldn't afford it, would still be connected to the internet without the program. If you look back, the late 1990s into the 2000s, we saw thousands of local newspapers shutter across the country. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the FCC didn't help. We had rules at the time that prohibited investment in local newspapers. Flash forward to today, that's potentially the future for broadcasters if we don't start to right-size our regulations. We can't sit back and just observe the decline in local journalism that's coming from the lack of investment potentially in broadcasters. There's a saying in D.C. that democracy dies in darkness, and it may very well be that the FCC is the one turning out the light. If we don't fundamentally reform our approach to radio and TV broadcasters, their future could be the one of local radio. There's a lot of reasons why I don't think it will be. It's incredibly valuable. There's nothing valuable. There's nothing that beats live and local. But we have to give broadcasters the chance to innovate and to compete. And right now they're competing against large technology companies that do not have anywhere near the regulations that they're facing that broadcasters do. So if we care about journalism, we need to care about a regulatory environment that will allow investment to succeed again in broadcasting.
How important is it for Congress to provide the necessary funding to the FCC for the continued management and development of the National Broadband Map?
Thank you, Congressman. The National Broadband Map is an absolutely essential tool. If you live in urban America, rural America, or anything in between. Because for the first time in our nation's history, we took more than 200 different databases, property records, tax records, satellite images from flyovers, and identified every buildable location in the United States. And then every 6 months, we have carriers fill in and tell us where they provide service, and then we offer the public and state and local actors the opportunity to challenge that service. So through a mix of data collection and crowdsourced information, we're getting granular information about where service is and is not. And that's important for everyone in Congress, because when you spend money to send it to someplace, you've got to make sure that there's follow-through. This map is your tool for accountability.
Last month, the FCC considered a proposed rule to require the implementation for wireless calls to the 911 suicide crisis lifeline to ensure that calls are routed based on the geographic location of the origin of the calls rather than area code and exchange associated with the wireless phone. When should we expect the FCC to take the next step there, and when should we expect that to be put in action?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll defer to the chair on timing. She brings orders to a vote, but I'll say that this initiative that she's pushed forward is a really good one. This idea that we can move calls to 988 to the local community makes a lot of sense. I've heard about this in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, about the importance of making sure that a call from South Dakota goes to someone that lives there as opposed to the East Coast. So I defer to the chair on timing, but this is one that I fully support.
Yes, listen, getting the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline more localized is a bipartisan initiative. When someone dials those 3 digits, when they're in crisis, we want to make sure they get local help. Right now, it's based on your area code, but if you're from Mobile, Alabama, and you move to Los Angeles and you dial 988, you're still going to be connected back to someone in Mobile, Alabama, but maybe you need resources in California. We can fix this with our geolocation proposal, which I hope to have done this year, but we're going to need our colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security and specifically the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to work with us to really get it done.
This is something I get asked fairly regularly, and I don't have a good answer. When we got rid of the fairness doctrine, a lot of people feel like that's been detrimental to our news media as well. Can you just talk about that, and is there any chance that you would ever consider bringing something back?
Well, the fairness doctrine was a policy from the 1940s. I mean, I wasn't around, but as best I understand it, that was when we had a very limited news medium. There was the newspaper, and there were a handful of broadcast and radio television stations using public airwaves. Since that time, we have public airwaves, we have cable channels, we have internet facilities. And the one thing that I would say is that having the FCC make decisions about what's correct and not correct, what's right, what's fair, what's equal and not, is an ominous role for government in this media environment. I wish I could make it simpler, but if you trust me to go ahead and take that role, you need to trust my successor too. And I would say that I think the best way that we can serve the public is to make sure that we hold accountable as public citizens all those folks who are putting the facts and information out there so that we can all ferret out and find the truth.
Give me an idea of what you're doing so that when, God forbid, something happens to one of the big satellites that does whatever, or small satellites, or you've done with rip and replace, and people are hacking into whatever the heck. Give me a feeling about cybersecurity and the FCC's mission.
Okay, well, first of all, you're right to be concerned about all of those things. I share every concern you just described. We all should. Because communications is an input into every aspect of our economy. It's essential for our national security. Absolutely. And so when I took over, I started up something that hadn't been going for years and years called the Cyber Forum for Independent Regulators. I got 39 different agencies, and I lead them to come together to see if we can harmonize our policies. We all have different statutory authorities, we all have silos, we all have different goals, but we are trying to come up with common language and to make sure that we are all working together. I also have been working with CISA on our Communication Security Reliability Interoperability Council. For the first time, I brought them right in to work with us. And when we started to identify problems with Border Gateway Protocol on internet services, that was done in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security. So behind the scenes, we have more cooperative relations on these issues than ever before, but that's ultimately because the problem is bigger than ever before. And frankly, we've worked a lot in a very bipartisan way on communication security issues. I think Commissioner Carr would agree with that. We have identified how to take away the authorization of certain Chinese companies. We have set up a new equipment certification system. As you mentioned, we have rip and replace. We're working with national security authorities to develop a covered list of insecure equipment. And just this month, we have, at the request of Commissioner Carr, we're now working on a policy to revisit the laboratories and certification bodies we use for radio frequency equipment and to make sure that those two are secure.
Can you commit to acting as quickly as possible and put pole attachment access complaints on the Commission's accelerated docket for fast resolution?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of soaring rhetoric around broadband, and not many people talk about poles, but it's really important. That's the infrastructure on the ground that actually allows for real deployment. One thing I want to make sure you're aware of is about half of the states regulate poles on their own. The FCC only oversees states that do not choose to regulate poles. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what's going on in Georgia. Be happy to follow up with you on that point.
Can you share with us the impact of upgrading our nation's 911 system?
Absolutely. I know you know these issues extraordinarily well and appreciate your leadership on them. As the saying goes, you might only call 911 once, but it will be the most important call you ever make. You need that call to go through, and you want the people on the other end of the line to know where you are when you are asking for help. So upgrading these systems is complex. We have about 6,000 public safety answering points all across the country. They are funded generally locally, and they were built for the era of an analog telephone when there was a jack in the wall and a curly cord attached to the phone. But as you mentioned, most of those calls today come from wireless phones. So we got to figure out how those calls come in. They are consistently identified where the people are, and that also that the 911 centers themselves don't have outages. We have updated our policies for location-based routing to improve the location of where the individual is using a wireless phone calling 911. And we have also increased the obligations of carriers to report on local outages to their local 911 call centers.
Earlier this year, the House Select Committee on the CCP sent a letter to the FCC raising concerns that American device manufacturers may be utilizing Russian and Chinese GPS signals in violation of FCC rules. And your office did recently reply saying you had opened an investigation into this matter. So, Madam Chair, what is the national security risk posed by American device manufacturers utilizing GPS signals from Russia and the PRC?
Thank you. Listen, GPS signals are absolutely important to modern life. It's precision information about timing and location that we count on in almost every aspect of our economy. First thing I think that is important is that the United States and its Space Force continue to put the L5 new versions of our GPS satellites in our skies. The more GPS systems that are safe and secure that our devices connect with, the more accurate that information. We have, during the last administration at the FCC, approved the use of European Galileo GPS systems. So that is something that has been approved. At the same time, we've had individuals, as that letter suggested, telling us that some of our devices may be collecting information from Russian satellite systems. We have started an investigation to understand the mechanics of that and how it works. Needless to say, there are opportunities for surveillance and opportunities for malicious activity associated with that. So we take this seriously, but that's part of the reason why we have an investigation, and we're going to get to the bottom of what's happening.
Tell me about our 911 technology right now, to where is it vulnerable to where it's like, hey, one of the things we're going to do to debilitate an area is we're going to mess with the water, we're going to mess with the power. It's like, oh, and by the way, we're going to demo 911, if you will. And I don't know that to be the fact, but 911's kind of your guys' bailiwick. How resilient are we with 911 if somebody's trying purposefully to
It is essential for all of us to understand that everything is vulnerable. Everything has vulnerabilities.
No. I understand it's vulnerable. What I want to know is what's the plan to make it less vulnerable?
Sure. So the challenge, especially with 911, is that it has been a locally funded exercise. So we have some states that have invested a lot in it, some states that have invested less in it, some states that have many public safety answering points, some states that have very few of them. But in nearly all states, what we have is a real effort to make sure that there's 911 redundancy. So if a line goes down, there's an alternative route for that traffic or an alternative public safety answering point that can take those calls. The best evidence we see of that is in weather events like hurricanes and disasters, where you learn about a 911 call center that goes down, but then you learn how the 911 call center in the adjacent county has taken on that traffic. And that is regular practice in most communities around the country.
And to your knowledge, is CISA involved in any of this redundancy? I get hurricanes in that, but we're talking about bad actors.
We're talking about malicious actors
purposefully
that would
trying to throw a dart.
You know, CISA's advisory, and we certainly work with them on our Communication Security, Reliability, Interoperability Council, which has a 911 working group.
Can you, in the next few days, let us know how to get a hold of the 911 working group so we can ask them?
Yeah, certainly. We also, I should point out that we updated all of our policies to make sure that there were outage obligations on the carriers, to make sure that 911 call centers are among the very first who are notified about any outages in their systems.
And Madam Chairwoman, I respect that. I'm talking about purposeful bad actor stuff as part of pulling down important infrastructure that may want to, and it's like, has anybody assessed it, or is it just an area that needs work?
Absolutely. I do think it's an area that needs work, in part because there's not been a national program for 911. Instead, there's been a state and locally funded one. And so we have some inconsistencies around the country. We should be addressing them.
Chairwoman Rosenworcel, what are the biggest barriers that exist in adoption and implementation in telehealth and telemedicine in rural areas? And what steps is the FCC taking to incentivize healthcare providers to participate in the rural health care program?
All right. Telemedicine's pretty incredible. You can bring first-class care to places that are really far-flung in this country. And we saw early efforts to do that in the pandemic, and they've outlived the pandemic. People are getting accustomed to the idea that they might be able to just have that follow-up appointment from the comfort of their own home. It makes them more likely to actually check in with their healthcare professionals. It's a good thing. There are three big challenges when it comes to telemedicine. The first, as you mentioned, is broadband. We have to get it everywhere or it doesn't work. The second, and we don't have authority over this, is making sure there's insurance reimbursement for this, because if you don't reimburse the provider, they're less likely to offer the service. And the third problem, and again, this is not under our bailiwick, but it's making sure that doctors and healthcare professionals who are authorized by one state can provide service in another state. State-by-state authorization can sometimes make it challenging. If you have a follow-up appointment while you're traveling, for instance, you might be violating laws you didn't even know existed. And with respect to being creative about this, let me just acknowledge Commissioner Carr here, who championed a connected care pilot program for healthcare at the FCC to really start exploring the more creative ways we can use this technology.
And I'd like to hear from you too, Commissioner Carr, on that question.
Thank you so much. I mean, you're exactly right that with technology today, people can get high-quality, affordable care directly where they live, including in communities that have primary, let alone specialists that have gone out of business. I first learned about this in a small town, Ruleville, Mississippi, where I met a woman, Miss Annie, who got diagnosed with diabetes when she woke up one morning with blurred vision. She wasn't seeing much progress using traditional care methods, but she was sent home with a Bluetooth-enabled blood glucose monitor and an iPad. Every morning she'd prick her finger, and the iPad would give her feedback about what to eat, how to exercise based on that specific data. And she saw a tremendous improvement. We took that idea and effectively made it nationwide through this connected care pilot program. And we stood it up exactly when COVID was hitting. And as the chair has said, that she's continued to build on those efforts and added a lot of maternal care verticals into that program as well, which has been really helpful.
Fun fact, where was the first 911 call?
Haleyville, Alabama.
Thank you.
I visited for the 50th anniversary.
All right, did you see the phone in the window?
I did, that red phone there.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
The town is so proud of it.
Well,
because
that's where
it's
Adderholt's from, Congressman
Yeah, it's a
Adderholt.
wonderful thing. It's like a reminder that really big ideas in the United States,
Starting small
they
places.
sometimes start in small places. Anyway, sorry, I got excited about it because it was excited to visit.
You've got to vote for her budget just based upon her knowledge of that answer.
You won.
With that, this hearing is concluded.